From our State House studio in Montgomery, I'm Todd Stacy. Welcome to Capitol Journal's Week in Review. We're in the heart of the legislative session now, as this week saw the House and Senate meet for the 16th, 17th, and 18th legislative days. That leaves us with 12 more remaining, which will likely take us into early June. Topping the news this week was the Senate passage of the Education Trust Fund budget and its related bills. At $8.8 billion, this education budget is the largest in state history. And on top of that, lawmakers are allocating $2.8 billion in surplus revenue carried over from the last year. The budget remained largely the same from what Governor Ivey originally proposed at the beginning of session, but the supplemental appropriations bill saw significant changes. Let's walk through those. The biggest line item change was the tax rebate. While the governor proposed $966 million to offer all taxpayers a one-time rebate check, the Senate reduced that to $275 million. That means the original $400 to $800 checks would be reduced to $100. Funding for school safety grants was increased from $10 million to $40 million, and classroom materials got a $20 million bump to allow teachers to go ahead and draw on that money before the next school year. Some line items were cut out completely of the governor's proposal. $200 million that was slated for the Main Street program was dropped, so was $31 million for the Magnet School program. And 3 non-education projects that had received some criticism were also dropped. $31 million for the Mobile Airport, $25 million for a Montgomery water park, and $25 million for the Port of Mobile. There were also additions to the bill. $200 million in projects at colleges and universities was added. $185 million was allocated to create a K-12 capital grant program administered by the Lieutenant Governor. And $500 million was put toward the proposed Educational Opportunities Reserve Fund with the intent to ensure the education budget can weather any economic storm. Senator Arthur Orr, who chairs the Education Budget Committee, explained why he felt it was prudent to reduce the tax rebate and set that money aside.
We ended up taking $500 million and putting it in a savings account. If you look at the business press, they're all predicting an economic slowdown. That means revenues will drop off. We're already seeing that in our income tax rates, or income tax returns. As far as the filings that we got, we've seen a drop off over the first 7 months of this fiscal year. Year over year, we're down already on income taxes. So the point being, we see a slowdown in the economy. We believe we needed a savings account to be able to continue the important programs that require additional funds each year, like the Numeracy Act, the Literacy Act, the salary matrix for educators. We need to keep that growth going to spread across the state, and that's the reason we wanted to establish that savings account.
I'll speak with Senator Orr in more detail later in the show. A bill dealing with transgender athletes moved this week and is one step away from final passage. House Bill 261 from State Representative Susan DuBose would prohibit biological males from competing in college sports designated for women, and vice versa. The bill passed the Senate, but now needs concurrence from the House because an amendment was added. I sat down with Representative DuBose earlier this week to discuss her bill.
Science tells us that no matter how many hormones you take or how much testosterone suppression that you go through, it does not eliminate men from being bigger, stronger, faster, larger lungs, larger cardiovascular capacity. There is no way to level the playing field with any amount of hormone suppression. So, I really am not trying to harm anyone else in this very specific area that we're talking about, women's sports, women's athletics. We need to keep women safe and protect them, allow them to be part of that team, allow them to be able to compete and win, allow them to have a spot on that podium. And if they have to compete against a biological male, it will ruin women's sports.
That wasn't the only controversial bill moving this week. Bills impacting elections and voting tend to draw intense debate, and that was the case this week for House Bill 209 from State Representative Jamie Kill, which would implement much stricter guidelines around absentee voting. Randy Scott was there in the House where the debate happened.
The intention here is not to keep people from voting, but to make sure that our process is as secure as possible.
Representative Jamie Keel is presenting House Bill 209 to the lower chamber. He says its goal is to make voting in Alabama more secure.
While people do need assistance, we've been very clear in this bill who could request that assistance. And so it's a very specific list of people that could request assistance. And those folks are any family member who's an aunt, uncle, grandparent, grandchild, niece, nephew, parent, full sibling, half sibling, a child.
If there's one area that would make it easy for voter fraud, it would be with the absentee ballot process. So I think that what you're trying to do is to shore that up, to lessen any opportunity for that to happen.
Hours of debate take place about this proposal.
You're saying that it's voting fraud, but you haven't given any data, any information, any evidence to support your position in this. So how would you govern this bill? How would the DA govern this bill? How would the police govern this bill? Give me some examples of that.
The same with any other criminal complaint.
So it's the same with any other criminal complaint. So if it happens or it didn't happen, we don't know if it happens or not.
Like
we
any
put
other
forward
crime.
legislation to say we're stopping the potential of it happening instead of actually fixing the problem.
House Bill 209 is approved. The House Democratic Caucus addresses the media about this bill upon adjournment.
They shut us out and would not allow our voices to be heard. We think it's very important for us to be able to represent our constituents, and that was taken away from us today in one of the most important issues that we have today, which is our fundamental right to vote.
Under House Bill 209, you've got 3 different criminal penalties that have been created. The first is a Class D felony if you hand someone a blank absentee ballot application. So merely handing someone a blank absentee ballot application can subject you to a year in jail. If you pay someone to ask for, to retrieve, or collect your own absentee ballot application, meaning that you paid your child or even paid your spouse to go down and get a absentee ballot application for you, you would be a Class B felon, and your wife or your child would be a Class C felon.
But if this does go through a final passage stage, I'm sure you'll see court challenges to this.
For Capitol Journal, I'm Randy Scott.
Prior to this week, all the talk was about the package of economic development bills known as the Game Plan. Now, that plan is law, but the real work begins at the Department of Commerce to implement and use that law. I spoke with Commerce Secretary Greg Canfield about that process earlier this week.
Once we got the bills passed, the game plan enacted, the governor signing it into law, that's when all the real work begins on the administrative side, the planning and the implementation side. So we're already working on that. In fact, we started working on that before passage to a certain degree. We weren't always sure what the final product was going to look like, so we couldn't put finishing touches on everything. But you know, as it relates to passage of the SEEDS Act, we're going to be utilizing the State Industrial Development Authority, SEDA as we call it, as the mechanism to deliver that program. So SEDA's never had this in-depth of a program. Hopefully we're going to secure the funding.
Earlier this week, legislative leaders and the state's top law enforcement officers visited the nation's southern border to see firsthand security issues there. Speaker of the House Nathaniel Ledbetter, Senate President Pro Tem Greg Reed, Senator Lance Bell, Attorney General Steve Marshall, ALEA Secretary Hal Taylor, and several district attorneys were on the 2-day trip to McAllen, Texas, along the Rio Grande. They met with federal and state border patrol. I spoke with Senator Bell upon his return to Alabama.
We see all this, what we see on the news, and I guess it really depends on what channel you watch to what you really see is going on the border. And I thought, yeah, I'd love to go. And he invited, and Secretary Taylor with ALEA went, and Connie Rowe with Lieutenant Governor's office, and not really knowing what to expect. It was a very eye-opening experience. We have a crisis on the border, and I feel sorry for the men and women of law enforcement down there that's trying to protect us, that's hands are tied. What our government is doing right now at the border should be criminal, and it's that bad. They are allowing people to just walk across the border, and I did not have a clue that the Chinese coming across the border was as big of a deal as it is, and they're flowing through daily. And what happens when you come in, you give them your name, they fill out a form, and they fingerprint you, and they have to take your name unless your fingerprints show up on somebody else. They have to take it as you say. You're given a form, and then you're given a court date. Your court date may be in 2026 or 2027. It could be in Atlanta, it could be in New Orleans, it could be in New York, and you're told you can go.
This week, the legislature took another small step towards finally building a new state house. With the current building in disrepair, lawmakers have been looking for options for a new home. A provision of Senate Bill 222 gives the legislature domain over the city block directly behind the building, which is the spot some leaders say a new state house would go. The Retirement Systems of Alabama recently put out a request for proposals to architects for site investigation, planning, and design. I spoke with veteran State Representative Steve Klaus about the need for a new building.
This building was not built to be a state house. It was built as a Department of Transportation building back in 1962, and the legislature took it over in '85 after DOT moved to their new facilities to temporarily stay here while construction was going on across the street at the Capitol, and then was going to move back. Well, of course, that never happened.
Right.
This building has served its purpose here. I think the main thing that we got to remember, because I know it's controversial to build a new state house, is it's for the people. It's for future generations. Mm-hmm. It certainly won't be for me, but it's not right for people to come from all over the state here to testify before committees, to see their legislators, and not be able to adequately get up and down. The hallways are narrow. Mm-hmm. The elevators are antiquated. People who are disabled in wheelchairs, it's hard for them to maneuver around these narrow halls. Sure, it's not right for them. And we need a building that's going to last for the next 200 years, for generations and generations to come, to be able to conduct the business of the state.
And that's the week that was in the Alabama legislature. We'll be right back with tonight's guests.
You can watch past episodes of Capital Journal online at video.aptv.org. Capital Journal episodes are also available on APTV's free mobile app. You can also connect with Capital Journal and link to past episodes on Capital Journal's Facebook page. And you can listen to past episodes of Capital Journal when you're driving or on the go with Capital Journal podcasts. Keep up with what's happening with Capital Journal.
Joining me next is State Senator Arthur Orr from Decatur, chairman of the Senate Education Budget Committee. Senator, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you, Todd. Good to be with you.
Big week for you as you got the education budget through committee. That was a pretty lengthy process, but also straight to the floor and did all the ETF and all the related bills in one fell swoop here this week. Walk me through the high points. You talked about it being a very challenging budget year because of unprecedented resources.
That's correct. It was challenging because when the word got out that we had a good bit of money in a surplus year over year, then a lot of hands came out too that were open, and certainly had a lot of ask of the state and all across the state. One thing we tried to do in the budget was attempt to keep it focused on educational type endeavors. Sometimes that gets a little gray, but we that was certainly an attempt. I think another thing that we did this year that's somewhat unprecedented is we established a savings account with $500 million, and the reason is, if you read the business press, the predictions are not good for our economy, and when that happens, the state revenues decline because the income taxes and the sales taxes go down, and we start riding the roller coaster down, and sometimes very fast. And I was here in 2009, 10, 11, and those were trying years for both education and the general fund, but having this savings account that's not triggered by proration, but we can keep the important functions in the education budget growing, perhaps, is the goal. And by that I mean the Literacy Act, the Numeracy Act, that are so important to our early grades and children across the state, that we give them a strong foundation in math and reading so they don't fall farther behind when they hit middle school and high school. They get frustrated, they drop out. They get disinterested in school, and sometimes get into things they ought not get into. So anyway, important for our state.
Yeah. Didn't used to be that way. I mean, I remember the years where if there was a big surplus in the education trust fund, it all got spent that year, and that's what led to those painful proration years. And there's a lot more talk about conserving and waiting for that rainy day these days, maybe because of those tough times.
That's correct, and what you certainly have to keep in mind is that conservative budgeting practices got us to where we are today. Working with former Chairman Bill Poole, who chaired the education budget for years, we didn't always spend every dollar that we could, and that led to having this large surplus that we had this year.
Mm-hmm. There were some changes to the budget and the supplemental from what the governor originally proposed. Maybe the biggest change in the supplemental was what y'all want to propose offering in that tax rebate. She had close to $1 billion, which would have worked out to, I think, $400 for individuals, $800 for married filing jointly. Y'all reduced that down to like $275 million, which would mean about $100 in that one-time tax rebate check. Walk me through the decision-making there. Were y'all looking to spend those resources elsewhere?
Well, we've touched on it already, in that most of that money that was headed towards the rebate went now to the savings account to make sure that we have prepared ourselves for the economic downturn that we all read about or watch on television. So that's the main reason we felt it more prudent to do, and we wanted to certainly respect and acknowledge the governor's commitment to try to get money back to the taxpayers of Alabama. They're the ones that send it to us in the first place. It's certainly not our money as legislators, so if there's a possibility to return some of that money to the people, I think that was important to the governor, and certainly we acknowledge that.
Mm-hmm. Another change was taking out the proposed funding for this water park here in Montgomery, the Mobile Airport. There were some other, I guess you'd say, non-education spending projects. Walk me through that decision making.
Well, they were tough decisions because I met with each of the groups, and they had compelling cases, but at the end of the day, the body felt like, and myself included, that we needed to keep education dollars focused on educational matters. And as I said earlier, sometimes that can get a bit gray. In these particular cases, it seemed more of a clear, defining black and white type decision as far as whether they were going to stay in the budget or not. I've been working closely with Chairman Garrett in the House, and getting his thinking as well as to how the House might perceive certain items in the budget, so we don't make one decision in the Senate and they make another in the House. If we can coordinate, that certainly helps. And I say that to say he seemed to be of similar mindset when it came to those particular projects.
Yeah. Well, and this kind of relates to the grocery tax situation because they've got this bill. Who knows when it's going to move, but everybody co-sponsored it. All the senators co-sponsored this grocery tax reduction. Maybe they're not mutually exclusive, but it's always sort of perceived as juxtaposed versus the tax rebate. And now that tax rebate has been reduced down to 100, I'm curious if you think the House might do away with it completely and focus more on the reduction in taxes on groceries.
It's a little bit of apples and oranges, certainly in my mind, because the grocery tax being a long-term or forever permanent type tax cut that would occur, and the $275 million used for the rebates being a one-time occurrence. So it's just two different factors at play there. But I think the grocery tax and other tax cut type legislation is now going to get a lot of focus because we had a bill come out of the House, Representative Daniels, regarding exempting taxes on overtime pay.
Yeah.
So that's now in the Senate. The grocery tax bill that you mentioned, ultimately that will have to be a House bill because it raises or reduces, in this case, revenue, and those have to originate in the House per the Constitution. But
so both those would have an impact on the ETF.
Absolutely. Right? So that and a whole host of other tax exemption, tax credit, tax cut type legislation. We were well over $1 billion, and I bet we're getting close to $2 billion in those kind of tax cut legislation. So my point is, the legislature is going to have to be very strategic as we go down this road and pick one or two or three, and depending on the cost, that'll be about it for all of those credits and exemptions because they cost money, and they're taking money out of education. And we need to certainly be mindful of that. We can't be all things to all people, and you've heard it said before, life's not a Burger King. You can't have it all your way. So we're going to have to make some hard choices.
Interesting. That'll be your committee's new motto.
I learned how to say no in the grim days of 2011 and 12.
I bet. Part of the budget also, I found this little line item you had reserved for your principal program. You've got legislation where you want to encourage more people to become principals, kind of incentivizing that. Walk me through the importance of it. Maybe I'm not characterizing that correctly.
Yeah, so after the salary matrix that we did for educators last year in the budget, there's been a lot of concern among principals, and they work, most places they work a 12-month year, and their compensation has not really stayed abreast. So what we wanted to do is add some training, some mentoring for principals, because a lot of times right now, Todd, you have a good teacher and they get identified as being a potential principal and thrown into the fray when the current principal leaves suddenly or something, and they may be thrown into an assistant principalship, but without a lot of training. So the vision is to create a pipeline of trained principals to assume assistant principalships and then principalships across the state, and they are very, very important. They're like a coach as far as the running of a school and how important and all that they have to deal with today.
And it's a different skill set really than
being a classroom teacher. But and that's my point. A lot of times they get thrown into the fray and they're not ready. They're untrained. Good people. But just a whole different set of issues when you have to manage a staff that used to be your colleagues. Now you're their boss, so to speak, as a principal in the school. So we want to improve that, raise that bar, but we also want to compensate them more in the process. So that's something I'll be dropping next week, a bill, and we're going to have to hustle it through, but I think it'll meet with good reception among the legislature.
Mm-hmm. Switching gears, I wanted to ask you about the open records law. You've been on this issue for a while. We have a pretty weak open records law here in the state of Alabama. It's frustrating to those of us in the media trying to access records. You're part of legislation to update that. It's been almost a seemingly impossible task in recent years to get that through. Do you think this year could be a possible year to actually update the open records law?
Well, we're certainly going to try, and we're working hard along those lines. We've had various bill drafts. The one that we have, we've worked out at kinks with the cities and the counties and other organizations. So we're going to be pushing. And I think it's important for us for our state to bring more clarity to our open records laws, because right now the law basically says that the government has to respond in a reasonable time. We'll define reasonable. This bill does several things, but the primary one is bring timelines where government entities would need to respond within so many days with an open records request. And if there are issues, they can work that out if it's an unreasonable, burdensome type request. And you do have some crackpots out there that just want to be a nuisance and abuse the system. But for those that don't want to go down that road and that are serious, then they need to have a timeline that they can expect to get the records that they need.
Mm-hmm. And while I've got you, I want to also ask you about your picketing bill. And I think has it already passed the Senate?
Yes, it has.
And so this is going to the House. Explain what this bill does.
Well, it comes from watching the picketing of Justice Kavanaugh's house some time ago. And my thinking was, in some cities don't have an ordinance, but if we had a statewide bill that would allow for banning of people picketing at one's home and in a harassing type manner, intrusive type manner, and by that I mean standing outside of your house at 9 p.m. with bullhorns and screaming and yelling, maybe on public property and the sidewalks, in the right-of-ways, but being in a harassing manner. Now, if they want to just have signs and whatnot and camp out on the sidewalk, well, then maybe that would be okay. But if it's an intimidating, harassing manner at the residence, then that's something I think we don't need to have in this state. And with the internet, it's certainly easily organized today. And this could apply to a defense lawyer defending an unpopular client, or any citizen may be accused of something and the public masses and wants to invade the neighborhood and protest. And I just think we can bring some kind of guardrails to that activity.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I remember it was a few years ago, a group attempted to picket the Attorney General's house, but I think they got the wrong house. And so, but it'll be interesting to follow this bill. We're out of time, but Mr. Chairman, thanks again for coming on the show.
Thank you, Todd. Good to be with you.
We'll be right back.
The World War II-era Tuskegee Airmen were the first African-American pilots in U.S. military service. Because Tuskegee was the only training facility for black pilots in the United States during World War II, potential pilots came from all over the country. The first African-American flying unit was the 99th Fighter Squadron, which deployed in the spring of 1943. The 99th earned a Distinguished Unit Citation, flying missions against enemy targets over Italy. The second flying unit, the 332nd Fighter Group, flew several successful bomber escort missions throughout the war. Its P-51 fighters had distinctively painted red tails, earning the unit and its planes the nickname Red Tails. In 1948, President Truman issued an executive order mandating the racial integration of all military services. The way was paved by the Tuskegee Airmen of World War II, and in 2007, President Bush collectively awarded them a Congressional Gold Medal.
You're watching Alabama Public Television.
Joining me next is State Senator Rodger Smitherman from Birmingham. Senator, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me here.
It's a big week in the legislature this week because you dealt with the budgets, and or the education budget. In the Senate, it passed unanimously, all Republicans, all Democrats. So tell me, from the minority perspective, did you get everything? Were you pleased with the end result?
I was pleased with the end results. I thought that Senator Orr and the Budget Committee, which I'm blessed to be a part of, took in consideration of a broad spectrum of needs and concerns we have in the state. And it's been a long time since I've seen a budget that touched on the state so broad and touched on so many of those needs that we have in the state, like this budget has done. So I'm proud of the budget, and I was proud to vote for it. And I think it's going to enhance the state in general, and I think it's going to enhance my region and the area, just Jefferson County and the surrounding areas in particular. So I saw plenty of opportunity in there. I saw opportunities for our junior colleges, saw opportunities for our full-year education. I saw plenty of opportunities for K through 12, as well as I saw many economic incentives and opportunities to help us be able to maintain the economic positions that we have there in that area.
One of the biggest changes that the committee made from the governor's recommendation was reducing the amount that went towards this tax rebate, right? It's a supplemental, $2.8 billion in sort of supplemental revenue, but taking that down significantly to where it was going to be like, $400 or $800 tax rebate to individuals or families, but that's down to $100. Talk about what the conversation was like in the Senate. It was a matter of spending those resources elsewhere.
That was part of the conversation, being able to address some of the immediate needs that we have right now, where that money was going to be necessary. Also, you had members who wanted tax cuts more than the rebate, so the rebate wasn't as attractive to them. And then you had members who wanted the rebate. So between all three of those factions, a compromise was reached, and the amount you see now is what was ultimately became the compromise.
There was also resources, more plussed up budget resources for struggling schools, specifically talking about funding the Literacy Act, the Numeracy Act, which getting reading coaches and math coaches into areas where the schools are struggling, really kind of targeting that. Was that intentional? Everybody wants to focus on these struggling schools?
Yes, I think that it was very intentional. I'm one of those kind of people that say that, if you don't put the resources over there, we're just setting the kids up to fail. The procedures are fine, but if there's not resources, then how are we going to expect them to rise up to that level? And I think the legislature took a close look at that and enhanced those resources in technology, and like you said, in instructional learning and materials. We provide funds now for classroom teachers to be able to buy whatever the supplies and things they need and not have to try to take their own money and or raise money just to be able to get the things that their students need. We also provide a component for security in these schools. Everything that's been happening, we had to step to the plate, and we put up millions of dollars so our schools can be equipped and be safe, and we don't have to worry about anything happening to our young people, but them being able to have the opportunity to learn.
Well, speaking of Literacy Act, it will be a year from now when that accountability provision kicks in, right?
That's correct.
And you were successful in delaying that, mostly due to COVID and things like that. Do you think we're ready, a year from now for that measure to kick in and potentially students get held back if they can't read proficiently?
Well, I think we're in a better position now than by far we would have been at that particular time. I think that we still have a little ways to go in terms of, I won't say everyone, but the vast majority of them being ready across the state. We have some areas that they've been able to bring the students up to that level, and we got some that's working to do it now. But we've got to make sure that these resources that we've allocated get to those areas. So, and you said, what are you talking about? I'm talking about tutors. I'm talking about, in some cases, you're talking about transportation. You got people that can't even get their kids there. And instructors, as well as different things that we may need to be innovative in the approach and making sure that they'll be able to read properly and, of course, be able to handle that math as well.
Well, yeah, and in talking about that bill with Dr. Mackey and others, they always emphasize it's not just the student gets held back; it's that they work all summer to try to get them up to the fourth grade, and I think that's important. And that's when you talk about these resources. It's not just about holding kids back; it's about getting them.
That's right.
Up to
get them there, and we're going to have a robust summer school or summer camps. We have the math camps that we provided the money for in the summer now, but we're going to also need to make sure that we have those reading camps and monitor them, say every 3 or 4 weeks to see where they are, so that we have to have enrichment with it so that we can get them there, then get them there. But I'm pleased with the efforts that's being put forward now. I think everybody's real serious about making sure those students are able to have that opportunity. It's just unfortunate that until these resources actually get to those areas, some areas have a greater need for these resources than some of the other ones at this time, and I think that will have a positive impact. I would hope that the efforts that I see now will intense and increase to the point where those students can be brought along, and we won't have we can't guarantee that nobody won't be left behind, but I surely hope that it's very few, if any, that is.
Switching gears, I wanted to ask you about this sticky issue of judicial allocations. This has to do with judges and circuits, and there's big disagreement between where these resources need to go. You're trying to protect your turf, Jefferson, Madison County's growing, and there's even around here in Montgomery this circuit. What's the latest with this conversation, and where's it going to go?
Well, started out with a couple of my colleagues putting in bills so that in their particular area they would be able to get judges, and that wasn't related to allocation; it was related to their need.
Okay.
Then I was in the process of filing a substitute that was based on the report from the Reallocation Commission, which said we needed 11 more additional judges to take care of our immediate need.
Just additional on top of what we have now?
Yes, across the state.
Yeah.
And I joke them all the time. I said we really needed 12 because they took one from us, but this bill only has 11 in it, and so Senator Gavan has taken that bill, and he's made it in large part, a part of his sub for one of those bills. So now, out of the Judiciary Committee, we have a substitute that embraces those 11 judges that everybody need, and we're looking at the possibility of having a moratorium on reallocation until 2027, to where all these judges will be in place. I think at that time that it'll show that we don't need to have allocation anymore at that time, because all the ones that have been identified, if we are able to pass this bill, they will have the judges that have been identified in those areas.
That sounds like some progress.
It's a lot of progress. And the other thing is that it's a committee there that is looking at how we came about making a determination of the needs and the positions of all our circuits, which I think will enhance a truer picture of Jefferson County, to show all the cases that we have versus what's actually being presented through a weighted mean. So hopefully we'll have an opportunity to actually do a manual and being able to take in consideration things like this. Some counties take the underlying cases and give them separate case numbers. In Jefferson County, we take the underlying cases and put them under one case that has numbers, such as if a person has a DUI, well, you're going to get a reckless driving charge, and then you're going to get
but it's one case.
See, but those are 3 different cases, but it's listed under one number because it was one stop. Well, when you count an allocation, you count in Jefferson County as having one case.
Yeah.
But the circuit that puts separate numbers on them, they get 3 cases.
Yeah.
So that was some of it, as well as the complexity. We're in a county with almost 800,000 people, We are some of the most complex cases that there is. And those cases take special time and take special attention. Well, in this reevaluation of how the approach that they took, they're going to take those things under consideration as well. And in this bill, there's some additional things that is being asked to be looked at in making that determination. So I feel very confident that once that is done, once we have the need satisfied, and once the approach is a little more uniformative in considering those things, I think that it'll come out to show the true load that Jefferson County has in terms of its cases and relationship to the judges. So I feel good about the fact that we are looking at that process from an open approach, and as I said earlier, I think that that's going to be able to provide what other people need, and I think it'll provide some stability to us in Jefferson County.
We've only got a little bit of time left, but I wanted to ask you about some of your newer colleagues. I had Senator Wagner on the show the other day, and he was talking about his, role as a mentor, over the years. You're a veteran member as well. You've mentored, senators over the years. You've got a few in the chamber this year. What's it been like with this new class of senators, and have you been able to kind of, shepherd them and tell them how things really work?
Yes, I have, and it's fun to be able to help your new colleagues. It's things that they're picking up and trying to grasp what's going on, and it's very positive that they don't mind asking you. It has nothing to do with party. I sit in front of 3 new Republican senators, and they turn around in a heartbeat and say, "Okay, I'm getting ready to do this. What you think about this or that?" And one of them joked with me the other day. I told him some things, and I shared some things with him, and then he said, "Do you realize you're sharing this with me, and I may have to use this against you?" And I said, "That's all right." I said, "That's the process,
The rules are the rules.
Rules are the rules." I said, "So I don't have any problem with that." I said, "That's what I just want you to be familiar with those." And so we have a good relationship among us in the body when it comes to that, and I'm real proud to say. I'm really real proud to say that. I mean that I've been here a while, and I can tell you this is one of the best classes that we've had, especially since the majority change. This is everybody shows a level of sensitivity, and look more to the issues. And so, I'm gonna close by saying this: when I came here in the very beginning, my wife told me something. She said, you have issues as R's and issues as D's. She said, so that on this issue you might be together with someone over here, and then you the same person that you wasn't over here, you may be together over here. So you keep an open mind and you address things issue by issue. And we've been able to do that, not just me, but I will give majority of my colleagues credit. They've took that approach. And that's why we're able to get this budget through, and that's why we've been able to work in a cooperative effort in many, many things. Will there be 1 or 2 things? Yeah, you know how they go. There'll be 1 or 2 that we've got to find a way to get through. But I would be willing to say 98% of the things we work hand in hand together.
That was good advice.
Yes.
Well, Senator, we're out of time, but thanks again for coming on the show.
All right, thank you very much for having me. Good to be here.
We'll be right back.
You can watch past episodes of Capitol Journal online anytime at Alabama Public Television's website, aptv.org. Click on the Online Video tab on the main page. You can also connect with Capitol Journal and link to past episodes on Capitol Journal's Facebook page.
Joining me next is Robyn Hyden, Executive Director of Alabama Arise. Robyn, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you, Todd.
Can you remind our viewers about Alabama Arise, the organization, and its mission here?
Alabama Arise is a statewide coalition. Our mission is to address public policies to make life better for people in poverty. So we know there's poor folks in every single district in our state. We have 150 member groups from across Alabama, and together we work to address public policy.
Well, in recent years, you may have been most known for your push on the grocery sales tax elimination effort. I mean, 20 years. How long has it been that y'all have been involved in this organization?
At least,
Yeah.
at least.
And so it's just really interesting that this year seems to be the year that it's really moving. I mean, chatter started really toward the beginning of session. Then, Representative McClammy's really pushing it. Senator Jones is pushing it. And they introduced this bill, I guess last week, with 35 co-sponsors in the Senate. I know it's not a full elimination. It's a halfway elimination over some years. So let me just ask you, from your organization's perspective, are y'all supportive of this prevailing grocery tax plan?
We are supportive. It is an important first step, we think, to go ahead and take part of the grocery sales tax away. We know it's not fiscally responsible to take the full amount. So we would like to see lawmakers come back, if they can pass this reform this year, pass SB 257, and hopefully a House version will come soon as well. We would hope they would come back next year and say, here's a fiscally responsible way that we can remove the additional 2 cents and fully untax groceries.
Mm-hmm. Well, so do you think will they have some financial data, economic data to say, okay, it did this much to the ETF, like Representative Daniels always says, the money's going to get spent elsewhere anyway, like the savings is going to get spent somewhere else anyway, which is sales tax and comes back. So do you think that they'll have some economic data showing that, okay, it's not the hit on the ETF that we thought it was?
I find that to be unlikely. I don't agree that if you save, 2 cents on your grocery tax here, that you're going to turn around and spend an equivalent amount of other goods and services that would then generate the same amount of tax. Mm-hmm. Taxes just don't work that way, unfortunately. So what I would find more likely is that, the public is excited about a grocery tax cut, but they see how incremental this one is. It's only a half cent a year, over 4 years. It will stop immediately if the ETF fails to grow more than 2% per year, which we've had just exorbitant growth, which we all know is not necessarily going to be sustainable. So what I would find likely is we would start to see, actually, this does cost money to education. And we hope that would give us fuel to then come back and say, okay, but we know there's better ways to bring in tax dollars to support education.
Revenue replacement,
yes,
which has been the proposal really the last several years, eliminating that federal tax deduction from our state income taxes. In your conversations with lawmakers on this bill or on this effort, because there are a handful of bills, is that where the rub is? Are Republicans resistant to that revenue replacement model?
Yeah, I think for lawmakers, there's this real fear of even our proposal, which we worked on for a long time to make sure that only upper income earners would pay more in income taxes. Many lawmakers look and see themselves in those upper income tax brackets. And I don't care if you're a Democrat or a Republican, we had a lot of pushback about that. And that's what stopped this bill from passing even, going back more than 20 years. So we think we may have to target that FIT deduction at a higher income bracket, potentially. We know that in order to get rid of the FIT deduction, we would have to put it on a constitutional amendment. It would be a vote of the people. And we've always said, let the people decide. Do you think it's more fair to tax income or to tax food?
That's kind of a way out, honestly, for lawmakers to say, look, I'm just letting the people vote on this, and I think something like that would probably be pretty popular statewide. But I'm curious, now that this is gaining momentum, I mean, I don't want to jinx it or count the chickens, but it seems like it's likely to become law. What's it been like in your organization? This is a priority y'all have had for 20 years or more, and suddenly it's maybe coming to fruition.
Well, I would give full credit to our members and our constituents. Going back when we first decided to work on grocery tax, our organizing director reminded me this was not Arise's first or second priority. We do listening sessions and community conversations every year. Mm-hmm. And we had said, why don't we do an earned income tax credit? Why don't we do a child tax credit? Why don't we look at property taxes or other tax issues? And the number one tax fairness that we heard across the state was the grocery tax. And I know it's not one political side or the other. It unifies Democrats, Republicans, non-voters. So I'm not surprised that it's taking off, especially given the historic records of inflation. People are really hurting when they go to pay for food. We know that the average family of 4 is spending $600, every 2 weeks on groceries, and that's the amount that they could be saving if we would simply remove this tax.
Let me ask you about the tax rebates that are going through. They got significantly reduced in the Senate. They're basically setting that money aside in a savings account for education, worried about future, recession or something like that. Your organization, like you said, advocates on poverty issues. What are y'all thinking about this? Are y'all pro rebate? What do you think about this reduction in the rebate from 400 to 100?
Our position on a rebate has always been these should be targeted to the most low wage or working class families. So the problem we have is that these rebates really are not targeted to where they would do the most good. I also am interested in polling that the GOP released that does show it is way more popular to do a permanent tax reform and remove the sales tax on food than just a one-time tax rebate. So, I'm glad they reduced the rebate amount, but I also honestly think in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't really do much to help those who are hurting the most.
It's $100. That's real money, but it's not 800 or 400 or whatever it was going to be. And I'm curious, honestly, if when it gets to the House, if it gets bottomed out completely, just considering that. And especially considering that the grocery tax cut, like you said, is more popular and all that. Switching gears, another issue that has been a big one for your organization is Medicaid expansion. Advocating for this for, several years. Not that it's going to happen this session. There's no bill or, anything like that. But there's a lot of chatter around the issue and maybe some alternative ways to go about doing Medicaid expansion. Maybe it's not called Medicaid expansion. Maybe it's some, more private sector type thing. What are you hearing? And do you think there's some kind of feasibility for this? Is it real? Is the chatter real?
What I'm hearing is more lawmakers than ever are getting educated on who is in the health coverage gap. I was really excited to see the House Health Committee really look at this, and they started from a position of just saying who doesn't have health insurance coverage. I think there has been a lot of misunderstanding about this. So many workers that we rely on, construction workers, food industry, retail, hairdressers, folks that we're struggling to hire and recruit and retain, those are folks who don't have health insurance and as a result sometimes are dropping out of the workforce with premature disability. They have untreated mental illness or substance use disorders. So the more that lawmakers are understanding that this is the population that we're targeting with expanding Medicaid, I think we're making some headway. And I will share, North Carolina just became the 40th state in the country to opt in to expansion, and they did that with Republican leadership after 10 years of saying, no, we will never do this. So it is encouraging me to see people who are saying, hey, after 10 years, I'm actually changing my mind. I'm looking at the evidence. We hear this all the time. We've done town hall meetings now in rural communities across the state. And I've heard from hospital administrators, city councilors, mayors, who've said, I really didn't understand what this was. And once I saw and heard the stories from my district and my community, I'm changing my mind about it. So I feel optimistic.
It's so interesting how the pandemic and then post-pandemic with the workforce shortage and all that really just, brought into stark relief some issues like healthcare, access, health insurance and the coverage gap, like childcare. Like never before, suddenly there's more attention to pay to these things just because it became a huge... So suddenly you can't find workers and you start to ask the question why. Healthcare and childcare is a big part of it.
And we've spent a lot of money and had a lot of talk this year about creating jobs and retaining and recruiting industries. But we now really have a crisis of where are these workers and why have folks either dropped out of the workforce or are unable to connect to these jobs. And I think, when we look at the data, it is things like healthcare, childcare, transportation, issues that we really now have the opportunity with some historic surplus money to really start to address.
Well, we'll see where grocery tax goes. We've got 12 more days of session. We'll certainly be following that, and we want to have you back to explain, the ins and outs of that policy if and when it happens.
I hope so. Hope to see you again.
Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks, Todd.
We'll be right back.
James Withers Sloss started the Sloss Furnace Company in 1880 to take advantage of the mineral wealth of the Jones Valley. He built Sloss's first blast furnace the following year. A second furnace soon followed, and Sloss Furnaces produced 24,000 tons of iron in its first year of operation. Sloss Furnaces was an industry leader in innovation and design. Its superintendent of construction, James Pickering DeVell, led Sloss through a period of modernization in the 1920s that resulted in Sloss becoming the second largest producer of pig iron in the Birmingham district. A slump in the iron market took shape in the 1950s. Business began to decline, and pig iron was basically obsolete by the 1960s. Higher pollution standards finally closed the furnaces in 1970. In 1981, Sloss Furnaces was designated a National Historic Landmark and today hosts events, concerts, and a metal arts program. The site continues to stand as a testament to Birmingham's industrial past.
That's our show for this week. Thanks for watching. We'll be back Monday night at 10:30 with more coverage from the Alabama legislature right here on Alabama Public Television. For our Capitol Journal team, I'm Todd Stacy. We'll see you next time.